Hello, and welcome to the Future of Tech Commission Town Hall, a public discussion on digital equity, access, and tech innovation for the workforce. My name is Lev Gonick. I am Arizona State University's Chief Information Officer, and it's my pleasure to co-host today's town hall with my colleague Donna Kidwell, ASU's Chief Information Security and Digital Trust Officer. I'd like to begin with a recognition that Arizona State University's 4 campuses are located in the Salt River Valley on ancestral territories of indigenous peoples, including the Akimel Ohodum, and the Pipash Indian communities whose care and keeping of these lands allows us to be here today. Today's town hall forum is an opportunity to both listen to a diverse set of perspectives on digital equity, access, and also focusing in on the workplace of the future, as well as an opportunity for you to participate yourself, both in today's conversation, as well as an opportunity to participate in sharing your thoughts in a forum set up specifically for this gathering. I want to share that obviously for all of us here today, digital equity is one of the great social justice issues of our time. Today, we're going to learn a lot more about that. We begin with one of the 3 commissioners of the Future of Tech Commission, Jim Steyer, the CEO of Common Sense. And Jim will both bring greetings and welcome, and he will also have an opportunity to introduce our Arizona Senator, Mark Kelly, who will also be bringing opening remarks. Jim, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lev. And we are really psyched to be here. Thank you so much to everybody in the audience for joining us. This should be a really great conversation. And I'd like to thank not just Lev, but also our good friend, Dr. Michael Crow, and the team here at the ASU Technology Office for their incredible work in putting this event together. You guys are leaders, not just here in Arizona, but around the United States and globally in tech innovation. It's quite an extraordinary university leadership. And this, as a loyal Stanford professor, I have to say that we have to give big props to ASU for the incredible leadership you guys do in this area. And we're really proud to partner with you in this event. Just for a tiny bit, and we're very psyched that I'm about to introduce your Senator, Mark Kelly, who's been a friend of ours for years and is a really thoughtful leader in this area and many other different areas. But just a little background. So the Future of Tech Commission was created at the behest of the White House and the the chair of the Federal Communications Commission at the beginning of this year. And the idea was actually to put together a blueprint for the United States, a coordinated tech policy blueprint for the country, including issues like digital equity and inclusion, but also covering issues like platform accountability, misinformation, disinformation, et cetera, privacy, innovation in education and healthcare and workforce, market competition, really the waterfront about how technology is 24/7 in all of our lives and how we as a society need to have a coordinated, thoughtful, long-term policy for the country. We are holding town halls. We had one last night live in Florida. We're so delighted to do it here in Arizona today. We've had them in places like California, Connecticut, Texas, Indiana. The idea is to get public input and from experts of all different persuasions into what a coordinated tech policy would look like for America on some of the most important issues facing. And there's nothing more important, by the way, than digital equity. So we're delighted to have you here. We're really excited about the student portion and some of the audience jam portion of this. And that we know will be a highlight. We've built in a pretty extensive portion of this town hall for audience engagement and speaking. We're also excited to hear from some of the really talented invited speakers and expert panelists we have. Just a couple of logistics. We will be posting a link to our public input forum so that if people have written input that they'd like to give to the Future of Tech Commission, we will make that possible. And we'll welcome feedback from individuals, organizations. And the form actually allows you to put in your own thoughts directly to any of the topics that the Future of Tech Commission is looking at. You can follow us on Twitter at FOTC.com. And most of all, we just are psyched to hear from the folks in not just Arizona State, but the people of Arizona. My job now is to introduce your Senator, Mark Kelly, who I think will pop up on the screen in a second. I will just tell you that I have known and worked with Mark for well over a decade, probably 15 years now. And he is a great guy. And Mark, I am so glad to see you on the screen. You and I have worked together on a variety of issues. What a surprise that you're going to be a leader on tech. We are so delighted to welcome you here. After you finish your remarks, I might throw a tough question or two at you, a follow-up, but really great to have you here, Mark. And to the audience, you're very fortunate to have Senator Kelly as your senator in Arizona. I will tell you that. Anyway, all yours, Mark.
Well, thank you, Jim. And I don't know if President Crow had an opportunity to speak earlier before me or not. So he did not. So, hey, let me just start by saying Arizona, as we all know, is one of the fastest growing states in the country. We've got a diverse and highly skilled workforce, and it's increasingly resulting in leading tech companies from around the country and around the world to make investments right here in the state of Arizona. And as Arizona's senator, my goal is to make sure that we support and encourage this growth while also ensuring that all Arizonans are able to get the skills they need to get the high skilled jobs of the future. Now, this growth is happening in no small part because of the leadership of Arizona's universities. And I want to be sure to acknowledge President Crow's outstanding leadership at ASU. ASU has now been ranked #1 in the US in innovation for 6 years in a row. And that ranking is a credit to ASU's president, President Michael Crow, and his tireless work to ensure Arizona State University attracts world-class researchers and develops innovative opportunities for students and for faculty and for outside researchers and entrepreneurs to partner with the university. But, ASU is not alone. I mean, the University of Arizona here, where Gabby and I live in Tucson, is one of the leading universities for things like astronomy and biomedical research, hypersonics, and photonics and Western water research and other things. And Arizona is also home to a robust community college and workforce training programs, many of which I've had the opportunity to visit in recent months, which will help prepare Arizonans for good paying 21st century jobs. So that's why I'm working with my colleagues in the Senate, Republicans and Democrats, to invest in career and technical education. We can bring the private sector and our community colleges together to increase the number of skills training programs and apprenticeships and meet the growing demand in key industries. That's already happening here in our state. And I've seen it just over the past few weeks at the Maricopa Community College, at Pima Community College, at Mojave Community College, where I was yesterday in Mojave County. These programs are getting students hand-on experience in fields like advanced manufacturing that also, by the way, have a very high demand for workers right now. And they're doing so in a way that is affordable for Arizonans and provides them with the skills they need to start a new career. It's important to me that students from every single corner of our state have the opportunity to take part in the economy of the future. And one barrier that exists right now for many students is access to reliable, high-speed internet, a broadband connection. I mean, in speaking with mayors around Arizona, it is one of the topics that comes up the most. But not only with mayors, with business leaders and educators and folks in the medical field. The challenge is that students face that do not have access to high-speed internet is substantial. So in the Senate, I'm working on this bipartisan infrastructure proposal. You probably heard about it. And part of this would put $65 billion towards expanding and improving broadband access. It would lay down cables where they don't currently exist, and it would help states and local communities connect families to broadband. And I've introduced bipartisan legislation with Senator Daines of Montana to cut the red tape and allow broadband projects that use the right of way along highways to move things along more quickly. No student should have to go to a coffee shop or a McDonald's to do their homework. No school should have to limit their curriculum, especially in STEM fields. They shouldn't have to do this for a lack of broadband access. In the 21st century, high-speed internet access, it's not a luxury anymore. It's a necessity to get a good education. It's a necessity to run a business. It's a necessity to provide great healthcare. And as we make these infrastructure and workforce investments, it's important to ensure that we are creating high quality, good paying jobs that fit the needs of all Arizonans. That's why I spent months working with my colleagues, Mark Warner and John Cornyn, to fully fund the CHIPS for America Act, which will invest $52 billion into the US economy to rebuild our domestic microchip supply chain. Now, microchips are in almost everything, from your cell phone to your vacuum cleaner to your car, to the most sophisticated weapon systems. And as many of you know, the world is facing a global shortage of microchips right now. Supply chains are disrupted by the pandemic. And at the same time, when demand for electronics are at an all-time high, and at the same time, current US domestic semiconductor manufacturing is at an all-time low. So we used to sell 40% of the semiconductors around the world in 1990. And today we have just 12% of the global capacity of semiconductors. Now nearly 80% of semiconductors are produced in Southeast Asia. Our legislation addresses these issues by creating federal incentives which match those offered by other countries to help attract and retain semiconductor manufacturing capabilities here in the United States. And I'm proud to report that our proposal was ultimately included in the United States Innovation and Competition Act, which passed the United States Senate on a bipartisan basis in early June. This renewed federal commitment has already yielded successes, with both the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company and Intel announcing significant expansions of their semiconductor manufacturing capabilities in the United States, and specifically right here in Arizona. These investments will bring thousands of more high-paying jobs to Arizona, where we are already a leader in microchips. That will make it even more important that we continue to invest in developing a strong workforce in Arizona. That's why, as we were working on this, one of my key priorities was to ensure that we make significant investments in research universities like ASU by fully funding a national network for microelectronics research and development. So thanks to our efforts, we secured $2 billion for this program. This will enable the Department of Defense to partner with schools like ASU to help students, faculty, and entrepreneurs access high-tech equipment and technology to develop new and innovative microelectronics technologies. That's how we revolutionize future semiconductor technologies and ensure that the next generation of semiconductor technology is made here in the United States. But just as importantly, fostering university partnerships ensures that students and faculties have access to opportunities for innovation and can develop the skills they need for the 21st century. While these initial successes are encouraging, we must do more to invest in universities, community colleges, and workforce training programs to build a highly skilled workforce of tomorrow and ensure that Arizonans from all corners of the state can get the skills they need to succeed. I'm committed to continuing this work in the United States Senate, and I look forward to partnering with my colleagues in the Senate and in the House and with leaders in Arizona and all of you to do just that. Thank you very much, everybody.
Hey, thanks so much, Mark. Can I ask you a couple of follow-up questions? That's great. And I'll say you are absolutely spot on about Arizona becoming an increasing leader in this. And it's right to give props to ASU for being a leading university here in the United States and globally on this issue. As you look at the broadband infrastructure bill that's in front of Congress right now, in front of the Senate on a bipartisan basis, assuming that goes through, when do you think you'll get, because you have both rural and urban areas in Arizona that need coverage for broadband, so that you have really 100% coverage. What do you think is a realistic date to say that we get this broadband infrastructure bill through, because that's the real resources necessary? What do you think is a realistic date by which everybody in the state, both the rural areas, which are tough to reach, and some of the urban areas? What do you think is a realistic date for?
First of all, 100% is really hard. I think
I know
98, 99% is probably more realistic.
Yeah, let's say 98%.
Some projects are shovel ready, ready to go. And often these things require economic impact statements to be done. And, they have to be competitively bidded out. I mean, that's a process. So it does take some time. This doesn't happen overnight. I mean, to provide, a high-speed internet connection for most Arizonans, especially in rural areas,
right?
It's a substantial project. So it'll, if things move along, I would say, something that would be reasonable would probably be a couple years.
Okay. And, wearing my professor hat here for a second. So there's a lot of students in the audience. We're going to hear from them shortly. Mm-hmm. If they want it, they know how important, they know better than we do, and then how important broadband is and the internet is, because they live and breathe it 24/7. What do you think they can do to make sure this happens? What are the kinds of things you'd say to students that this is how you can be involved on this, Mark? This is how you, over the next 5 or 10 years, including career opportunities, can actually make a difference and make sure that Arizona really is one of the leading states in the country on these issues.
Well, so reach out to your elected officials, House members, reach out to my office. I mean, I'm sold on this stuff, right? I mean, I worked on this, legislation here over the last 6 months really hard to get the CHIPS Act moving forward. And so I don't have to be sold on it. I'm somebody who has a background in technology. I'm an engineer. Right. Education is incredibly important for me. I served in the Navy for 25 years. Spent time on the International Space Station, which, by the way, has a really poor internet connection. So I've lived with bad broadband in my time orbiting the Earth in space. But you'd be surprised. So like a member of the House of Representatives represents about 700,000 people. Right. You'd be surprised at how few people actually reach out with letters and phone calls. So if a student is willing to do that, make some calls, show up at events, talk about this, send a letter about how this is important to them, that'll have an impact. It really does.
Okay, that's great. And last thing, because you've had such an interesting career path, Mark, any suggestions to students about career paths? You've had I've known you in several different parts of your career. Any other thoughts for young people about this? If you were 21 years old today, what kind of advice would you give to yourself?
Well, I would say, first of all, go into a career field you think you would like, that you would really enjoy doing, because then it's not going to work, right? It's going off to do something that you really enjoy. And by the way, if you like something, you can really be much better at it. You can be good at it. You can succeed. So I'd look something that you're passionate about. And at the same time, if it's something our country needs, right now we have a lot of demand out there, not a lot of supply in a lot of fields. Cybersecurity is just one example. Healthcare, we need scientists and engineers. We've got countries out there, near peer competitors of ours, that graduate more scientists and engineers than we do now. We've got to get back. We've got to lead in that area so we can lead in innovation and invention and development of new technologies. So STEM fields are really important to the future of our country, but it's important that you find something you really, really like to do.
Could not agree more. Mark, great to see you. Thank you so much on behalf of the Future of Tech Commission and everybody who's here today. And we will continue to work with you. We really say hi to Gabby, and great to see you.
Thanks so much. Great seeing you, Jim. Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. See ya.
Welcome. See you guys. All yours.
Thanks so much. That was just fantastic. I'm so grateful to the senator for joining us, and Jim, fantastic questions. Just that opportunity to see this extraordinary federal commitment is really inspiring. And to think through what that means in terms of the exciting jobs of the future, really preparing for those jobs, and then making sure that the opportunity we're talking about is something that's actually accessible by our students. I can't think of anybody better to help us understand that than my colleague, Professor Brayboy, and the students that we're about to hear from. So without much ado, I will hand this over to Brian McKinley Jones Brayboy. He's the president's professor, senior advisor to our president, the vice president of social advancement here at ASU, a fellow of the American Educational Research Association, and a member of the National Academy of Education. Brian, thanks so much for being here. I can't wait to hear what you guys are bringing for us today.
Thanks, Donna. It's really great to be with you all, and good morning. I really appreciated the conversation with the senator. We're going to jump right into this with students. We have the real pleasure of hearing from a number of current and or just recently graduated students really who are interested in larger questions around digital equity and what it means for them in their daily lives. So we're going to jump right into it, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and give us some sense about why they decided to join this event and what their ties are to this subject of digital equity. And I'm going to start with Lourdes Pereira. Lulu?
Skagdash, ani nam chiki Lourdes Pereira, ani verhia cheratam chiome sirmuk amdil sirmuk chikshan chik kabaki skigdam ani nemashta marshon hakakar hamashta makar. Good day, everyone. My name is Lourdes Pereira. I'm here to Rotam in UMA, and I come from the San Lucie district of the Thonautham Nation. I'm a double major here at Arizona State University in Justice Studies and American Indian Studies, and I'm honored to be here with you all today. So digital equity and access affects the majority of sovereign nations, and I don't believe that it's possible to have these types of discussions without mentioning or hearing from those Indigenous perspectives, which is why I saw the importance of participating in today's panel and event. I've experienced many obstacles just to come close to digital equity, and I still face these obstacles to this day. I also see this affecting my community as a Hiachirotham within the Thonautham Nation as well, and from my own peers. And I have heavy ties to this topic and discussion, and being a part of a family of 9 sisters and 4 brothers, and having a single parent growing up, and having those assistants like food stamps, WIC, and food banks. I've just grown up with a lot of financial struggles, and have basically just faced this or faced a lot of obstacles. And so I've just been honored to participate with you all. Thank you so much for having me. Sapa Hagudai.
Thank you, Lulu. Lorena, welcome.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lorena Austin. I'm a recent graduate of Arizona University from the School of Transborder Studies, where I studied U.S. and Mexican regional immigration policy and economy. I was invited to this event probably because of my, during the pandemic, my involvement and volunteerism in community action to bring COVID-19 supplies to this, where we provided water, food, resources, medical supplies, and that was just a community event. Pulling together to ensure that we were bringing necessary items to communities that were being highly affected and had the largest infection rates of COVID-19 at the time. But a lifelong connection to Indigenous communities. My mother is a social worker, and as a young child would take me to Salt River Penal Reservation to help tutor children. And I always just knew that what I was being taught in my public education did not really match or mirror what I was experiencing in real life or seeing in real life. So just really excited to be here and be part of this conversation to see how we can actually provide equity to these communities that have for so long been oppressed and not recognized in the ways that they should be.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate you being here. Mary Haddad, welcome. Good morning.
Hello, my name's Mary. I was born in Los Angeles, but my parents are both Arab immigrants. I'm double majoring in conservation biology and ecology, as well as earth and environmental studies. So I have an interest in the environment and everything that it has to offer us, as well as protecting it. I mostly joined this event. I got invited through a friend who was going to be here, but was no longer available, who is brilliant. I met him doing during a diversity and inclusion outreach program, actually. And he kind of got me in touch, and here I am. And I think it was, for me, I thought it would be a great opportunity to engage in the conversation surrounding digital equity and like what implementation could do for minority youth, but especially for Indigenous science. Deeply reforming the education system to provide, digital social equity for underrepresented groups is, in my opinion and experience, one of the most critical initiatives that could be pursued. I mean, my experiences are not extremely unique to the minority experience in America, in that I grew up a first generation child of immigrants, and in low socioeconomic status with little access to both the interpersonal and the economic resources that are necessary to guarantee my path in life. But I stay strong, and I have a determination to uplift others in situations like me, who came from backgrounds like me. And I'm continuing forward my academic career to focus on facilitating diversity and inclusion outreach and programming in conservation biology in particular.
Thank you, Mary. And Brianna Smith, thanks for joining us. Good morning.
Hello, good morning, everybody. My name is Brianna, and I have my bachelor's in tourism development management. I am here to understand inequity because we have to understand what caused this separation in the first place. I'm here to learn more about how we are facing these problems with compassion and understanding them at face value. I've always been involved in community development projects and discussions because I believe that the solution happens when we do come together. I'm looking forward to hearing about what everyone has experienced during this pandemic and recognizing everybody throughout this panel, and hopefully getting some solutions or towards some great discussions.
Thank you all. As I said to you in earlier email, I'm just so profoundly impressed by each of you. So I'm wondering, for a few of you all, what are the most intense challenges you and those you know are facing when it comes to having access to high-speed internet? And how do suitable learning devices like laptops or tablets or phones factor into those challenges? I'm going to actually start with Lorena on this one.
Sure. And I'm sorry if there's an echo behind me. I'm actually having bandwidth problems today, so that is very appropriate for today's topic. But I think the most important thing to understand is this is a very layered conversation, and it's important to not group all Indigenous communities as the same, because they're all individually trying to navigate this process. And it became very clear to me that the pandemic started is how willingly available tech companies were to provide access to internet to urban areas. And so that showed me that, the internet is accessible. It just depends on who can afford that bandwidth. So it's a much bigger picture than just handing out laptops and calling it a day, because so many students can't then access that bandwidth, and good bandwidth at that. Something that I wanted to bring up, I heard a theory about spectrum sovereignty from Dara Blackwater, who's a Dinesh scholar out of the U of A, and talks about the use of space where airwaves are transmitted and how that translates into money and power. And so she estimated a dollar amount of about $40 billion is transmitted through airwaves, and a lot of that space is over Indigenous communities and reservations. We're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of square miles, and estimated that $7 billion of those dollars is transmitted among Indigenous lands. So just imagine if Indigenous communities had access to that money that their land is being used for, what that could do for the infrastructure of these communities. So it begs the question of what sovereignty really looks like to me if they're not allowed to access their own monetary wealth from their communities. So, and like Senator Kelly said, that they're trying to approve initiatives to increase bandwidth across these communities. That's going to take some time. So in the meantime, I'd really implore tech companies to realize and actualize, kind of walk their talk. They want to provide all these things, but they could at this moment provide those monetary means to these communities, but don't, probably for a variety of reasons.
Thank you, Lorena. Brianna, do you want to weigh in here on this?
Yeah, absolutely. When I think about this inequity, I think that we have to recognize that everything we do involves having access to the internet. Even before we were working and going to school from home, we did everything on the internet. You have to have access in order to apply for online job applications. Applying for school is made easier online. Finding information like where the nearest doctor is and getting an appointment is all done online. So if you're not doing it online, you do have to find the transportation to go to the place, to fill out the paperwork, to do the things necessary to just exist as a human being. And I think that is unfortunate because that does cost time and money. And we have to recognize the fact that not everybody has that access and those resources in order to just survive. And beyond that, I mean, everything that we do that's entertainment, relaxation, all involved with the internet access. There are several scenarios that, people have to determine if they're choosing to have access to Wi-Fi and using that cost, or if they're going to have an additional meal. I mean, it truly comes down to really determining, what is necessary. And I agree with Senator Kelly. I do believe that it is necessary. It has come to the point where everything that we do involves Wi-Fi. And so there are solutions, right? We could go to the library and we could, use those resources, but how late are they open? So if we're going to provide resources, how are we able to function where we're allowing those to be over the hours of our 9-to-5 jobs? How do we recognize the everyday person and make sure that we're compassionate to everybody's situation? And even if we are providing these different, resources, how are we making sure that it fits for everybody? So that's something I think is a challenge in itself.
Thank you, Brianna. Lulu, how about you?
Yeah, so I actually would like to go off of starting with just what Lorena stated as well with tribal territories. And that was a big thing that I was going to point out as well, is like when you're talking about a reservation as big as the Navajo Nation, which is the largest reservation within the United States, that's a lot of territory to get through. And many of my peers and my relatives, you face that as an obstacle. That how is someone going to go all the way out to where you live or where your village is and install what you need to be installed with high-speed internet? And a lot of people don't have that accessibility. And if so, sometimes, and I saw this a lot with the pandemic as well, some of the tribes would say, okay, we have this Wi-Fi for your students, but you have to come and get it. And then that's also going off of what Brianna was also stating, right? The accessibility and that the transportation of going back and forth. I have experience of attending school within the Thanatham Nation and also within the Tucson Unified School District. And coming from a family of 9 sisters and 4 brothers, I mean, we didn't even have a computer. And I know that's a different time. I'm not that old, but it was a different time of, having your own laptop and that accessibility. But I was able to at least walk, within the Cells district. When I attended school there, I would at least walk to the library to use a computer. And within the Tucson Unified School District at the time, I would be able to use the computers that they had within the school. And so, that accessibility, it is not like that when you're talking about villages and you're talking about rural communities, which are the most rural communities that you will see within the United States. And these are just really huge issues, because how are we going to say as youth, right, to go back to our homes and to see our relatives when, I have emails to check, I have a job to do, now I have school to do. And so now not even wanting to go back because, well, that's a major obstacle for me and, my relatives and my peers who are attending school as well. So they're just really major issues as well. So they pointed out great perspectives here.
Great, thank you. Mary, do you want to weigh in on this question?
I think I'll yield my time this time.
Great.
My peers did a really good job.
I agree, thank you. So I'm wondering for you all, what are the, how have you managed through the pandemic, and what strategies have you used to address what we've just talked about? And what practices that you started to engage in the pandemic would you like to see continue moving forward? And actually, Mary, I'm going to bring this one directly back to you.
I will say, so regarding practices from the pandemic in particular, something that I've been kind of toying around with in my head, I brought it up a couple of times, my friends. For me, seeing that the digital infrastructure is already there, to be recording lectures and also live streaming them, it's hard for me to name reasons why those resources shouldn't be available to students. So that in particular is something from the pandemic I'd like to carry over, because if we're going to focus on digital equity, once the resources are there, we also have to take into account that on some level, there are students who are overworked. There are students that are parents. There are students who are focused on all these different aspects of making them who they are. And on some level, yes, the freedom might be taken advantage of, but at the end of the day, like, we are still providing an avenue to knowledge and an avenue to the lectures. And I don't think that that's really a bad thing in my head. Obviously, this is more of like a post, broadband. That's the basic, that's the bare minimum we need to get into place before we can start saying that these students can reach those lectures or have the laptop or the computer necessary to reach those lectures. But it is like an interesting thought, I guess, to me, that maybe we should keep recording lectures and keeping those available for students, or keeping them live streamed in case someone has to leave town really quick and they don't want to miss out on the content.
Thank you. I think you've just issued a challenge to institutions like ASU about how are we going to engage in pedagogical practices and educational practices moving forward to create greater access to what professors and instructors are offering. Brianna, how about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So something that I faced within events, as you can tell, there hasn't been many, and including this one, it is virtual. So as an event student, it was incredibly difficult recognizing that I was not going to have the same opportunities as in person. There were a lot of exciting events and opportunities to meet new people and get connected within the events world in person, and recognizing that that experience was, then moved to virtual. And virtual, everybody was very intense and trying to figure out what was the next step and how to utilize their resources and change up their plans. And so students kind of got lost in the scramble. And so trying to recognize if we are going to have this hybrid version, to maybe include VR or smart technology where we are having those experiences where we are getting to tour still, but it is from home, and trying to explore different avenues of how we can learn and keep students engaged at home, because that's the other part too, right? If I am close to my Netflix, I might switch that on compared to going to class and recognizing that I can watch that presentation later. So to your point, Mary, just recognizing that balance, and seeing, where it comes, where it's necessary to have that time online.
Thank you. Lulu, I'm going to come to you and then Lorena next.
Yeah, so during this pandemic, a lot of financial support was something I struggled with heavily, but I relied heavily on my tribal emergency assistance fund, which I was very fortunate that they even offered that through the San Lucie district. And I've actually been receiving that every month. Of course, you have to keep applying to that, but it is something I really relied on, being a student in the city of Tempe, to keep my apartment and keep, having groceries is something that really helped me, of course, and even just to be able to pay the bills there. Something I'd like to continue to see from also my tribal community and tribal communities, and also from the university, I would just say is that support they really gave. A lot of professors were open in helping during this time, right? Because right now I'm actually in Tucson with my family, full of a house of like 10 people, right? And so everyone's using the Wi-Fi right now as we speak. And so if I cut out, right, professors wouldn't just get upset, or you would get kicked out of that Zoom, right? There's that support from the university. And then you have that tribal support too, where they're reaching out to say, hey, do you all need that Wi-Fi? Or, is there a way we can assist you financially, right? With that big of a family. My mom's actually not working right now. She's taking the bar, and my stepdad's the only one who is a teacher and actually is the one, having financially supporting our big family right now. So I would love to just continue to see that support from my tribal community and from our university here at ASU, and then also that outreach portion, because I really saw our districts within the Tohono Nation reaching out, right, saying, hey, are you okay? And then also our university doing that with our students too, like, hey, is everything okay? We just want to make sure, right? Because we're all in one household with our big families, and I really like that outreach portion. So I hope I can continue to see that as well. Zapa Hugadai.
Thank you. Lorena.
Yeah, I think I have a little bit of a different perspective on this, and it comes down to, how we managed to get through the pandemic was community support. And coming from a marginalized community, Latinx, I think we've always been linked together in community help and relying on one another, because to be honest, in my community, the government was not coming to help us. So we had to do what we needed to do, and that's kind of what we did when we were helping with Navajo Nation supplies and donations, understanding that we need more Indigenous people in power that can help make decisions that affect them. So often we can have all these conversations, but until you see it, and I implore everyone on this call, if you have not been to a reservation, especially up north in Navajo Nation and those other communities, Hopi tribes, they didn't have water. We had to bring huge pallets of water from Costco, and this is 2021. So again, just recognizing that we still have a really long way to go, but what I would like to continue to see, obviously we have Deb Haaland, who's now Secretary of Interior, but that is still not enough. And understanding that we have to defer to the people that are actually living through these situations. And so I would just like to continue to see, this is a wonderful presentation and conversation, and just hoping that people really take what we're saying here and put them into action. It's kind of like that so what now what type thing that we do. So just really imploring people to take all of these experiences and put them into action.
I feel like I need to send you a thank you gift for teeing up the next question so beautifully. Thank you. A few of you all have said that you're willing to help us think about. We've just heard from the senator. There are other policymakers here. What do you think is needed to overcome your biggest challenges? What will it take? I'm going to start with you, Brianna, and then I'll go to you, Lulu.
I would absolutely say that access to knowledge and to resources is incredibly important. Just thinking about, the difference between all of these different companies, right? Cox, who you're going through for your Wi-Fi, who you're going through for your devices, learning, how much it's going to cost, what's the lowest amount that you can get away with as a student or somebody who is, barely able to afford. How do we do these comparisons? How do we provide this amount of information to people who choose to refuse and ignore it because they would much rather, just focus on surviving and trying to get by the next day? How do we recognize these problems and create solutions that are based on human experience instead of just, okay, well, it's available. Why don't we just, do this? Everybody should know to do this. But not everybody has access to that knowledge. Not everybody knows what to do in these situations. So how do we inform people? How do we provide more ways to get the information out there?
Thank you. Lulu, please.
Yes, how? So I would just like to point out too, going off of what, Lorena said as well, there's a lot of issues these, Indigenous peoples and obviously federally recognized people, tribal members are facing throughout this time. And so there is a larger conversation here, of course, when we're talking about this. And I know specifically the topic is digital tech, right? Just that. But when we're talking about, even for the Thanath Nation or other reservations, there's no indoor plumbing or, there's a lack of water. And a lot of reservations are facing these issues. You have missing murdered Indigenous women, you're trying to protect sacred sites. There's a lot of things going on. And of course, we're just looking at just one little piece, right? But I would say big parts of this is just partnerships, right? So partnerships with border schools, border communities, like also stated, right? The Navajo Nation, there's major border communities. You see like Winslow, a town like Winslow, or even Tucson, right? To the Thanath Nation, just those partnerships, right? I think is really important. I would say language accessibility as well, right? So we can't just have people kind of going out and being like, hey, we want to help, and then no one really knows how to talk or, if anyone, here knows as well, the Navajo Nation, they have their own indigenous language than, let's say, the Tohono or the O'odham, right? We have different language as indigenous peoples. And so there needs to be that accessibility as well, and how to know that, we're seeing our own people in these spaces and people who can speak to these people going all the way out to these villages and places like that. Accessibility to installation, kind of touching on that as well. And then tech literacy, I think, is so important as well, and intergenerational as well, right? We want our elders to at least understand a little bit of that. If we teach our youth, maybe our youth can go back to their elders and, teach them a little bit, because there is, with these obstacles, then we have that lack of, tech literacy for our youth. And then when they come to universities, like an amazing university like ASU, right, there's going to be this, obstacle of them being able to have the same opportunities as other people. And I think that is so important for them to have that. And that goes through, right, events, workshops, outreach services. And as well, I would also point out is federal funding to support tribal communities, of course, and these tribal schools as well. And having accessible assistance for all tribal members, no matter where they are located. I think that's so important, because when we're talking about Native right to vote, you can't even get a ballot all the way out on these rural communities because there's not even like solid streets. You're going off the road. So I think if we're going to install these infrastructures and things like that, there needs to be people who are going to be able to always help our tribal members, even if they're out, past the boonies or wherever they may be. We need that, and they need to be able to have that phone call, right, to call and ask for that help as well. So hagedai, Sapa.
Thank you. We've got just a couple of minutes, and Mary, I would just want to hear from you really quickly. Let's just say policymakers said to you, we're going to give you access to all you need to address challenges. What would you do with it?
Honestly, my answer is probably going to be along the same lines as my peers. But I think in a lot of ways, our next steps to ensure that beyond providing the physical medium through which to physically access knowledge and those resources, leaders in education find it crucial that we address also the soft and hard skills necessary for success outside of academia. I think that's one of those things, like a critical piece of digital equity, like for me to have the training necessary to navigate the digital tools and the online professional workplace, and both of which facilitate me finding the opportunities that could potentially be provided. An anecdote, I guess, is for me, this manifested itself in my first lesson in building a presence as a researcher online. I honestly didn't know there were so many websites, and it's almost standardized to the point where if someone hadn't explicitly told it to me, if I hadn't heard from a scientist who explicitly showed me these platforms are the ones that you need to be on, this is how you connect with people, then just internet and a computer on its own wouldn't have got me to those opportunities or places. So I can't even begin to imagine the number of scientists and non-scientists that have had a similar experience. And to think that, in a future in which everyone has that basic, let's say computer and access to internet, there are still resources being denied when we aren't explicitly providing, access in resources that are accessible, appropriate, and explicit, where we're explicitly providing these are for you to take, because I've honestly had an issue. Maybe it's from my background, but I've heard it from a lot of minorities and people who have had similar experiences to me, but sometimes I have difficulty asking for things or seeking out things because I have trouble recognizing on some level that each person should be entitled to those opportunities. So I am entitled to ask for those things. So I guess in an ideal future, we are providing these things to students, training, online tools and resources explicitly, and making sure that we are continuously available if they need help, support, I guess anything they may need.
Fantastic. I want to thank you all. We need another 45 minutes or hour just to hear from you all because you're so brilliant. Really grateful for for this. I know that there are opportunities for folks to fill up the Jamboard. I just quickly want to, Common Sense working with Hope Lab released earlier this year, a really nice report that I had a chance to read over the weekend called Coping with COVID-19, how young people use digital media to manage their mental health. It's really a fantastic resource. I'm hoping someone can drop it in the link at some point for folks who want it. You all are brilliant. I want to just quickly return to what Lorena started us with, which is really the intersectional components of this. So while we're talking about digital equity, you all have helped us think about what are the infrastructural issues that we are getting at? What are the larger sovereignty issues? How do we deal with wealth and access? What do we do with knowledge, the intersectional needs of this? What do we do with basic needs of water and cooling, for example, in the midst of all of this? So while we're talking about digital equity as something really specific, I think you all have helped me realize that we've got to do this in a much more intersectional, broader way with this. So thank you for your brilliance and thank you for the gift of your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to have you. And I kind of concur with Brian. We could keep going for a long time listening. And frankly, there's so many different questions to ask you. Speaking of which, there are about 15 questions that we've got in our Q&A. Some of these are ideal for our next panel. So we've just got a few minutes where this is the moment to get over on the Jamboard and talk a little bit about that, or to take a quick bio break so that you're well hydrated in a humanity moment before our next incredible panel. Erin, do you want to do a quick demo of the Jamboard that everybody's over on right now?
Absolutely.
Thank you, ma'am.
Pull that up and share my screen with everybody. So I am Erin Morrow. I am part of the ASU production team here at University of College Office. And as you see the Jamboard in front of us. So the first page is just really your how-to. You'll notice over here on the side, you have these lovely little pieces that you can use to create a sticky note, to write a message. However, what you're going to want to do is go to this top part where it says 1 out of 7, and you're going to want to start on page 2, which is where our first question is, and then page 3 is our second question, and page 4 is our third question. All we have are 3 questions. After that, it's just blank for anything else that you might want to share with everybody. Please feel free to just click the sticky, write your note, and then hit save, and then there it is. And you can move it around, and some of them will end on top of each other once in a while, but we'll move them around and make sure that everybody's are seen. If you have any questions, let us know. Thank you so much.
We've got a handful of our students still with us. So I'm going to ask a question for you guys that are still here. If we take Mary, Lulu, Brianna, Lorena, the things that you were talking about, do we think that there should be funding for educators and researchers and related cooperative extension programs that specifically go in and help train and mentor folks that are the recipients of these, staple digital access opportunities? What do you guys think? I'll just open that up to all of you, because you all kind of articulated some of this in your responses earlier with Professor Braithwaite.
I would go ahead and say that I do think that that's really important, but I want to emphasize how important it is to have people who are our own people, right? Who are Autumn, who are maybe Dene, or who are Hopi, who are pursuing those fields, right? Environment, or they're educators, or if they're researchers, like they should be in those spaces and being funded, right? To then go back and to occupy those spaces, because I think that it's always funding people who don't always look like us. And then you have a language barrier, you have a culture, a custom barrier. So I would say that's so important, but to make sure that they're, right, indigenous to that place, or just indigenous in general.
Lulu, I love that response. And just the awareness of actually supporting those that are the ones that are going to be directly the voices both directions, right? Because I need that too. I need to hear directly from them, and they're the ones doing the most important outreach. How about our other folks? Anybody else want to respond to that question? This came in from James Round. So thanks, James, for the question. Lorena.
I would absolutely 100% echo Lourdes' response, because I transferred from Mesa Community College to the School of Transborder Studies. And it was the first time in my life that I had more than one professor that looked like me, that my name was said correctly in class. And so being in that environment felt like home for the first time in an educational setting. And so it is so incredibly important to ensure that representation from these communities is available. And, you know, I've been in hiring committees. I work for Maricopa Community Colleges still. I'm a student government advisor. And it's so important. We go through these processes and then they say, well, we just couldn't find anybody. And it really begs to question how hard did they look, or where were these jobs posted? But I guarantee you there are faculty and people available that are doing this work already and want to do this work, and they need funding. So I just really implore educational institutions to stop using that crutch and saying that we just couldn't find them, because I found that in the School of Transporter Studies and ASU, and again, changed my entire life and perspective on what I could do with my life in the future and what I could become professionally.
Lorena, that's very powerful. Thank you. Brianna, Mary?
I will say, I want to say, first of all, I think that it should mean a lot to the people out here that I was about to say the exact same thing, that representation is critical. I think one of my first personal, at the very beginning of my journey, you know, the imposter syndrome still hangs around. But one of my first experiences really feeling a part of the scientific community was when a brilliant, you know, professor who was a woman of color, who understood me and understood my struggles, took the time to speak with me. And then eventually that led me on the path to honestly where I am exactly right now. So I think it was critical for me, at least, to be able to speak with someone that I know on some fundamental level understands you know, social injustice or, you know, digital inequity. So yeah, just seconded what my peers have said, thought they said it wonderfully.
Yeah, I would just like to add that I think it's one thing to say that you have the resources available to students, but it's another thing to really evaluate how those resources are implemented and how those resources are taught. For example, just my transfer experience from community college to university, I was terrified and I had to ask tons of questions to all kinds of people about, I didn't even know you had to use, you know, a card to get into some of the buildings. So really recognizing that, you know, what may seem as a simple thing or, you know, something that everybody should know, we shouldn't assume that. There are a lot of issues when it comes to, you know, mentoring. You're not just mentoring for these different softwares, but you're mentoring for the access to these resources. You're mentoring to recognize that, you know, support is needed in all different levels and at all different times, because students are so unique and have different situations. So it's important to really recognize the human experience when implementing something.
Oh my goodness, you guys are so articulate. You know, I deeply appreciate the incredibly, you know, simple but not terrifically obvious things that you're bringing up. You know, I think probably everybody who's joined us today cares deeply about these issues. It's when you actually do have that opportunity to share or to sponsor someone to do something, it's really thinking and frankly hearing voices like yours that help us figure out how to actually proceed and take advantage of the great opportunities that Senator Kelly and his colleagues are working so hard to help create for all of us. You guys are amazing. Lulu, Lorena, Brianna, Mary, I'm so glad you're with us. We are going to segue into our next panel. I see a few of my colleagues joining me. There we go. So as they come in, I'll do a quick set of introductions as we see them. Yep, more coming in. That's fantastic. This next panel is going to be a change maker panel. So we've just heard these incredible voices from folks who are actually living this dream, experiencing this right now with us. And now let's kind of turn towards folks that are trying to facilitate this in various ways across the community. The change makers that we've brought on board to talk to us today about, frankly, the solutions that we need to put in place. I think we're all here, so that's great. I'm going to start with Nicole Umaya, who's our digital inclusion library consultant at the Arizona State Library Archives and Public Records. She's an archivist that turned library consultant, and libraries are so important in this ecosystem. I can't wait to hear the things that you bring. Nicole supports libraries on projects such as improving library technology, broadband networks, a big topic of today, Wi-Fi hotspots, laptop lending, all these important things that really enable what we're trying to achieve. So thanks for being here. Our next panelist is going to be Mr. Robert Alovardo. He serves as Vice President of Information Technology Services and Strategic Planning at the Chicanos por la Casa, which is the largest nonprofit community in the organization in the country. He does a lot of business strategy planning in that particular department, and there he's providing strategies to more than 150 of the CPLC locations. So very anxious to hear his insights from across that really broad organization. Hallie Kalzak is also with us. She's the Associate Superintendent of Policy and Government Relations at the Arizona Department of Education. Thanks so much for being with us, Callie. As part of the agency's leadership team, she's overseeing the agency's policy development and government relations work, including the implementation of the federal COVID relief. So love to hear what your last year has been like, Callie. And then Erin Carr Jordan. Dr. Jordan's the head of social impact and the head and co-PI of the National Science Foundation's Advance Program at Arizona State University. She has over 2 decades of experience in higher education, and her roles include faculty and department chair, national directors of academic partnerships, and served as an associate dean. So a really wide background. So here's who we have today with us, Lev. I'm going to kick it over to you for our first question.
Great. Well, we have a hard act to follow, clearly. And thanks again to a terrific student panel and to Professor Brayboy for facilitating a great conversation, and to all of you for participating in the Jamboard and for the Q&A questions. Please keep them coming. So as Donna has done a lovely job with brief introductions, I'm just going to ask each of our panelists to briefly sort of share where they come from with respect to sort of the digital equity conversation of the day in a personal way. Where are the intersections of the work that you do and the things that you care about? Clearly digital equity, as Brian pointed out, actually following all of our students' terrific framing, is really an intersectional consideration here. So I know many of you are interested in digital equity and other things, and so feel free to sort of connect those dots for us along the way. And if it's all right, I'm just going to use my screen as a way to kind of go around the horn here for introductions. I'm actually going to start on the opposite direction here, if it's all right. I'm going to start with Erin Carr Jordan, and please, Erin, share as you will.
Thanks. And good morning, everyone. And what an incredible student panel. What a tremendously hard act to follow. And there's so much that I personally learned from their experiences. And I'm so very grateful that they were able to join us today. As Donna so graciously said, I'm Erin Carr Jordan. I'm the head of social impact here at ASU. I've been working in the equity space for almost 2 decades now. My work focuses primarily on access to technology, gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls, digital equity, and preparing people for the future of work. I would say I describe the work that I do broadly as ensuring that everyone has an equal opportunity to thrive, and identifying all of the resources and all of the stakeholders who are necessary to ensure that that happens. And absolutely from an intersectional standpoint, understanding that vulnerable populations are disproportionately impacted. And so awareness and engagement and deep listening, intense listening are tremendously important. And so as a parent, as somebody who's been in this space for a very long time, I think it's wonderful that something like this event is happening and that we have an opportunity to learn from one another to advance these efforts.
Thanks, Erin, and I'm hoping you'll get a chance to also share some of your thoughts about the intersectionality with sustainability, as that came up both from our students and several questions that were in the Q&A.
Definitely.
Callie, would you please just sort of share a little bit of how you come to the topic of the day?
Sure, thanks, Lev, and thank you to ASU and the Commission for bringing together and hosting this important conversation. So I have been at the Arizona Department of Education throughout the pandemic. And our teams here have had to navigate and collaborate on public policy and other initiatives to move students and educators into distance learning. And that all was happening very quickly with a lot of
fluid factors throughout the pandemic. So, and I will say this has hit me personally in the sense that it became very sobering to know the urgency that Arizona faced in transitioning all students to distance learning, and that there was not the infrastructure and readiness for all students and educators to make that shift. And in some cases, there was not an immediate fix. I mean, there's some parts of Arizona that don't have any options for internet, even with the access to hotspots. So the inequities have grown throughout the pandemic, and that's going to be an ongoing work for the state and public policymakers and all sorts of stakeholders in the recovery process. But I think the awareness of the issue has become much clearer. And it's clear that government at all levels has a key role to play, especially in the equity piece, and ensuring that it's not just about market forces, but we are using targeted resources to really ensure there's access for all students, and as part of our commitment to public education.
That's terrific. And Callie, thanks for your leadership across the state on behalf of all of the families and the children who are part of the K-12 system. Robert, when we did our first check-in, there was a large stack of laptop computers behind you. And I got a sense that you were a very practical leader in this space. Please do share with us where you come from on the topic of equity. And the work that you and your team are engaged in.
Thank you, Lev. Yeah, this is a great conversation, and the Q&A and all the questions that we see, those are things that we deal with every day, right? Because our company's in 6 states, and we have 51 different lines of businesses from housing to health and human services, education. And so we see this, we're in all rural communities all the way from the northern parts of the states down to the border, right? And so one of the things that I saw was a big issue in technology is people just didn't have the technology in order to attend their classes and their education. I ran into some people that were doing pamphlets, right? And so every week they would get that and they would have to go pick it up. So they would have to go to the school, which they couldn't, right? Some of them were working, trying to watch their kids and doing other things as well. So with that, that's where we started, partnering with AZ Strut because we found that 30% of students didn't have computers or any of that stuff, right? So we're like, let's tackle one problem at a time. So we did a fundraiser and we fundraised quite a bit of money, and so we partnered with AZ Strut. We got computers, and we helped all families from northern Arizona, from Tuba City down to down by the border states, Nogales. And then from there, we said, okay, there's other problems, right? Getting the internet itself. And so we partnered with Cox Communications. And then we also partnered with other agencies as well. And I joined the AZ Broadband Stakeholders Network. And so they look at getting broadband to different sites in Arizona, but also there's other groups on there too. And so with that, I found that through that collaboration, we're able to get training, because that was another big thing. We had parents calling us, grandparents, just crying, saying, hey, I don't know how to get my kid online. I don't know how to use this tool or to help them. So we found a lot of that. So with different collaborations, we were able to provide a solid solution so that kids could get online, access the internet, know how to use it. And then it's ongoing, right? And then you take that to our small business lending, right? A lot of these small businesses were being affected as well. You have a lot of restaurants, right? And we're helping them get online with their restaurants and those types of things. So this really hit us hard in our communities. And so we had to provide quick solutions, right? Because technology in 4 months, it advanced 5 years, right? So that's how we started and kind of where we're at, and we're still in the thick of all of this.
Good, Robert. And you're already going to sort of the next topic of conversation, but I need to get Nicole into the conversation. We do want to focus on solutions. And again, please continue the Jamboard work. I'm going to ask that the team, that Marissa perhaps go forward and share again sort of where folks can actually contribute directly to the public input framework. Again, for everyone who's on this webinar, it's hugely important that you not only see this as an opportunity to listen, but to actually have public input. And part of it is this conversation here, but part of it is actually the way in which evidence is being gathered across the nation. So Marissa will post that in a moment. But one of the recurring themes, Nicole, when we had our student panel, and Brianna raised it a couple of times, others is like, where are those community organizations like libraries she specifically called up? And I know that your background has and commitment and passion is to the library world, but please do share your story, how you come to this topic.
Thank you, Lev. And yes, I'm certainly encouraged by all of the library visibility that we have this morning. In my role as a digital inclusion library consultant, I really support every angle of digital equity with these important community anchor institutions and libraries being the heart of communities even before the pandemic. So in my role, we leverage federal funding to support broadband infrastructure build out to libraries themselves. And that involves coordination amongst other broadband stakeholders and schools and local coalitions. But we also want to make sure that the library leadership and staff members have the skills to make technology decisions about the types of services that they're providing to their customers as well, and to continue to broaden the conversation and our understanding of digital equity and access to not just be about infrastructure, of course that's foundational, but also about the adoption pieces. So how can we continue to support digital literacy training at library centers, and how expansive that is to really include more than just basic computer skills, although we get customers every day who need some of that support, establishing email addresses for the first time, remembering their passwords, things like that, up to career pathways and finding resources that are available through their libraries for continuing education and whatever that role in that community is that they're trying to gain. When the pandemic caused a lot of public libraries to close their doors to the public, there's a study by New America that found that actually 15% of their survey respondents lost their primary source of internet access, which is there at the public library. So my colleagues at the State Library and I quickly made some moves to be able to help libraries add network boosters to expand that library service, that Wi-Fi service outside to the parking lots. But as a lot of people have named today, parking lot Wi-Fi is not really equitable access. And especially in a place like Arizona, that's not a place I'd want people that I care about to be accessing this vital information. But we still knew that it was meeting an important need in the moment. We also knew that we needed to get this information out to as many people as possible about where places are that they could get online. So we developed an Arizona free Wi-Fi map that we shared out as widely as possible, and it's had over 250,000 views. So we know that it's really reaching a wide amount of people. But in this kind of statewide—
And what's that website, Nicole, for that Wi-Fi finder site that you and your team created?
Thank you. Thanks, Lev. It's called connect-arizona.com, Connect Arizona. And we're really a statewide coalition of people who are trying to advance this conversation about digital inclusion, but to provide a whole person sense of digital equity for individuals. So I have a team of library digital navigators that provide one-on-one support, free of charge for anything from a matter of what are the affordable broadband offers in my area to running a Zoom funeral online that's come up, to how to sign up for COVID vaccinations. We even help teachers and library staff across the state figure out opportunities that they have for virtual programming or figuring out how to connect some of their students. But there's so much to talk about. I know we've got a—
Yes. Well, thanks, Nicole, and for sharing. And I do want to sort of say that this sort of next question I had in mind was to talk about solutions. And again, you beautifully shared some of the work that that you and your library colleagues are advancing here. And I know you've also, as you mentioned, sort of also working on actually the digital infrastructure, which came up in our students' conversation. Can I just ask you to provide a real short headline for some of that digital infrastructure work that you and the library folks are doing? And then I'm going to go back around the horn the other way to kind of invite quickly Robert to share other pragmatic, practical solutions that you're working on, and then we'll finish up with Callie and Erin and keep the conversation going. We're about halfway through the time we've got together this morning.
Oh boy. Yep. So, one important tool that we have at the state government is to support how we leverage federal funding for this broadband infrastructure. And that actually comes from a federal program called E-rate, or the Universal Service Administration program, to support broadband deployment to schools and libraries. So we will support the application of those processes so that can provide broadband to the door, as well as supporting the internal connections. So it's a, kind of over a decade program that's providing, the funding for the broadband service that otherwise, libraries wouldn't be able to offer robust digital access. However, we know that about a third of libraries are reporting that they can't actually improve their broadband speeds because they're already at the maximum speed that's available in that area. And simultaneously, a number of libraries have few choices of broadband providers as well. So there's an issue of competition, not just for individual households trying to connect, but for our anchor institutions as well. So part of our broadband deployment agenda involves trying to help coordinate amongst as many anchor institutions as possible so that we're implementing smart policies like dig once solutions and coordination of broadband deployment to these areas. We also are interested in identifying other anchor institutions that aren't typically eligible for things like E-rate funding, so that we can kind of fill some of those gaps where there might not be a library, maybe on the reservation or in a different rural area as well.
Thanks, Nicole. I'm going to actually call an audible here and invite Callie, because you raised the issue of E-rate, and obviously the Arizona Department of Education is the home of much of the coordination on the school side, of course, the state library on the library side. Callie, do you want to share a little bit of sort of your orientation to solutions, including, if it's appropriate, to comment on the E-rate?
Sure, and I can kind of build off what Nicole was mentioning about leveraging some of those anchor supports already embedded in communities. We, through some of our recovery funds, have initiated a project called Final Mile to develop some proofs of concept across the state, which involve collaboration across local governments, but with some state level support and expertise to look at the fiber that's already exist in communities and how we leverage that in sort of a consortia in order to transmit out to student households. So this is something that we are hopeful could be an initiative that could be scaled across the state to ensure that as the state works to build sort of broader broadband access through some main arteries, that we're also ensuring that there's a way for it to get out to some of our most remote areas as well.
Thanks much. And Robert, a quick headline from you, and then we'll finish this up with Erin, and then ask maybe Donna if you wouldn't mind facilitating stuff coming out of Q&A, as well as comments from our colleagues here, and of course, drawing a thread from our students.
Some things that we've implemented and that we've done for the community is our early childhood development programs. We've been getting Wi-Fi enabled laptops, or Wi-Fi tablets, I'm sorry, and getting those out into the community, developing locations where staff can go, or where the community can go and work on assignments, do those types of things. We have community centers that have been very successful, with social distancing and all of those things. And that's really helped, especially with online learning, where kids were having a hard time. We'd sit there with them and we'd help them, stay focused and listening to the teachers, those types of things. So that's worked out really well for us. And just small businesses, helping them get their businesses up and running with technology. I think the biggest gap right now is the security piece. That's kind of our next version. I think that all of us need to look at tackling is the security of all of those technology solutions. But those are just real briefly.
That's great. And again, keep those ideas and suggestions. Again, there's a very practical, focused opportunity. And that's terrific. Erin, thoughts on solutions, which you deal with every day?
Yeah, and echoing everything that the others on the panel said, I think from a practical standpoint, I think it's really important that we bring in all of the different stakeholders and we look at this from a multi-sector capacity and understand that when we bring business, industry, civil society, education, K-12, and higher education, workforce development, when we bring all of our expertise together, we can fill those gaps that we might not have seen if we were only looking through our own lens. And if we look at it holistically from a really, what are we trying to accomplish as it relates to equity? Digital is one piece, but we have to understand that as the students incredibly eloquently highlighted, there are other issues that if we're talking about achieving digital equity, we also have to address in order to get to a place where everyone really does have an equal opportunity to thrive. And that gets at that intersectional intersectional element that you were talking about, intersectionality, not just from multiple sectors, but multiple members of a coalition, understanding that race, gender, all of these variables as we're looking at equity are equally important. And as we identify solutions, we have to be engaging, listening to, and responsive to the unique needs of the communities all over the state. And if we come together as cities, towns, policymakers, humans doing these good works, that we then are only positioned to create something that can move mountains, because we really do have mountains still to move.
Erin, that's a fantastic segue that I'm going to take advantage of for the question I wanted to ask. And
you bet.
So as we think about these solutions and then pivot them towards the entire mountain range, right? It becomes a question of scale. And a lot of what you've just alluded to really has its heart, that kind of empathy and personalization as well. So I'm curious if you think about scale and personalization, and we'll start with you and then kind of go around since you led into it. Are there exemplars or emerging things that you might want to share?
Sure, and I was also pinged a little bit about the the SDGs, and so I want to very quickly just
there's a nice question about those.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we understand that there is a commitment that's been made. It's been made globally, individually, at a community level, at a statewide level, and equity touches across all of those things, whether it's working to eradicate poverty or ensure that everyone has quality access to education, or reduce gender inequalities, or reduce inequities, or get to climate change, or all of these things. It isn't until we have an ecosystem where everyone can fully participate, that is the digital equity piece, everyone fully participating in the economy, in society, in all of our processes, that we can get to a place where we have full access, where everyone is really leveraging their expertise, their strengths, their education, their knowledge, their willingness, all of those things for the greater good, which is where we all want to be. As far as exemplars, I think there is an umbrella right now born out of ASU in conjunction with several other entities lighting up the future, where we're working in conjunction with the communities to understand the availability gap, the adoption gap, the utilization gap, and to try to create an ecosystem and a gateway, and to leverage all of this technology that we have available to us, and anchor institutions, as mentioned by Callie and Robert and Nicole, and all of these pieces to create an ecosystem that leverages best practices and efficiencies, so that we can better serve the communities, and so that we can understand their unique needs responsively, respectfully, and effectively.
Callie, how about from the ADE? Do you see exemplars that you'd share with us?
Unmute there. Yeah, so I think, when we think about digital equity, we are often thinking about it from just the access, the infrastructure, but then also from the literacy piece too. And so I'll speak a little bit to the literacy piece in a good initiative that we saw a lot of success with this past year. It was actually a partnership with the ASU. We also worked with the Governor's Office in Philanthropy to create an Arizona Virtual Teacher Institute. And through the support of ASU, they were able to kind of be very nimble in standing up a program quickly to provide professional development to teachers around the state. They were also able to work with individual schools to customize some of the training, but it essentially offered immediate training on how to navigate virtual teaching platforms and in hybrid instruction as well. And so as the pandemic was going on, addressing some of those needs through that training. And that's something that we will continue this year as well. And that training was also opened up to early childhood providers. And so it had reached over 11,000 educators across the state and 1,100 schools over the past year.
Callie, you've said that so elegantly, you make it sound easy, and I know it is not. Nicole, do you have something you would share?
Thanks, Donna. I've had the honor of, being a witness to some incredible things that public libraries are doing to be able to serve their communities in these pandemics. They quickly jumped to providing free meals when schools were closed, and to developing take-and-go kits of laptops and Chromebooks together to support, emerging businesses as well as students. And really thinking together with some of their community partners to be able to meet some of these needs and really finding people where they're at. But when I think about models that I'd like to see repeated throughout the state and throughout the country, I'm just so humbled by some of the words that the students had, especially thinking about representation in these sectors. So I would love to see a future where we have more native librarians and archivists and information professionals who are really seeing these career paths as integral and vital for really for survival and for our community well-being as well. So thinking about ways that we can elevate the role of libraries as anchor institutions while making sure that that workforce is appropriately trained and future oriented as well. In terms of statewide, other statewide initiatives that I think there can be more coordination on is really investigating our definition of broadband. Right now, all of our data hinges on specific thresholds of service, which is 25 megabits down, 3 up. And as we know from the pandemic, that's really not adequate for supporting multiple students in a household, and even this idea of prioritizing download speed, so passive consumption of information versus upload speed and participation online. I think that can really be investigated as we're thinking about deployment and as we're thinking about what counts as quality broadband access.
With the future of libraries, like, who knows what those careers are going to look like for the students that we just had in the previous panel. Jobs we wouldn't even imagine, right? Robert, how about you?
Yes, just to talk a little bit about something different is we found that 86% of our clients at CPLC through our research and evaluation department have access to the internet through cell phones, right? So mostly everybody does have cell phones. So as we look at moving forward, it's getting data and people access to those data and creating fun apps that can help them get the information that they need for services. Because when the pandemic happened, we had to pivot as a company and figure out how are we going to meet people where they're at as far as providing service, behavioral health, workforce development services, even our immigration programs, right? And automating those processes so they can be done remotely. So I think as far as emergent technologies, I think that's kind of where we're looking at moving towards next, to get that data into people's hands so they can look at it, make decisions, and be a part of the discussions.
Between the conversations that we're having here and the insights of our student panels, I think we could make a whole series of these conversations. Another 45 minutes would be wonderful to dive deeper in.
Well, let me thank all of the panelists today on this very pragmatic solutions orientation, although also commenting significantly on policy considerations that are very important, both at sort of the high level policy as well as I would say, very important local policy considerations that have been raised here. Please, again, join me in thanking them. We're going to immediately transition to our last panel, but not necessarily the last segment. We're going to ask Angela and Meredith to join us for a panel that really is looking at the workforce question and the use of technology to advance work of the future. And of course, you've just mentioned there in a nice segue, Donna, you chatting with Nicole, the conversation about library professionals of the future. And of course, there could well be many other interesting new opportunities, again, suggested by all of our panelists this morning so far. So if it's all right, I'm going to, just to make sure that you have all the time you can get. This is to Meredith and Angela, because we've seen just how quickly this is going. I'm going to invite both of you to very briefly introduce yourselves rather than me reading your bio, and then go right into I know Meredith actually has a little presentation she wants to share. And so we're going to let her kind of do the quick intro of herself, do a little bit of a presentation. Angela, then we'll ask you to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And then we'll hopefully have enough time for Don and I to advance some quick conversation between you before we bring Jim back to close out the commission's town hall today. So with that, Meredith Lacy.
Sure. Thank you so much, Lev. And it's such an honor to be with this incredibly impressive and thoughtful group. My name is Meredith Lacy. I lead upskilling at Arizona State University, and we focus on building and scaling job-relevant education programs, working with experts across the university. And we're really passionate about creating programs that can be accessed by learners who have historically been underserved by traditional education. So I've gained a lot from the conversation today. And I'm going to share my screen, because as Lev mentioned, I do have a very few slides just to anchor the conversation here. Wonderful. So I'd like to start with a quick story, actually, about a time recently when I was back in my hometown in Austin, Texas. And I went to a local grocery store that I used to go to all the time with my family growing up. I had the chance to connect with a woman named Sharon, one of the store cashiers who had actually worked at the store for 20 years. And she was telling me how, even though the neighborhood was booming around the store, she was having great difficulty keeping enough hours at the store to be classified as a full-time employee and to retain her benefits and to qualify for healthcare coverage. So the store was bringing in more self-checkout options, and more customers were getting their groceries delivered. So the store was significantly cutting back on staff. Sharon is just one example of the millions of Americans whose livelihood has been reduced over time and who feel pessimistic about their job prospects. Automation threatens 47% of jobs in the US workforce, and 44 million Americans are not earning a living wage. It doesn't have to be this way. The vast majority of these Americans have been underserved by traditional education. This is a major challenge, both for individuals, but also for employers who have really struggled to find qualified candidates for critical roles that require a higher level of training. Excuse me. Skills-focused learning has never been more important as a pathway to economic opportunity and security. Innovations in online learning offer enormous possibilities to serve learners, employers, and communities through workforce-relevant education. We have seen real shifts in the capabilities of online learning over the past 5 years and how it's perceived in the market. I remember several years ago, there was still significant debate about whether outcomes from online learning could compare to those with the traditional classroom setting. And studies now show that high quality online learning can lead to excellent student outcomes. So what ingredients are needed to teach learners in-demand job skills and to provide pathways to a stable job? First, we need programs that teach job-relevant skills in in-demand areas. Those skills should be identified in close partnership with employers based on the skills that they say they need for a successful workforce. So to provide a few examples of top skills for job success, professional skills are critical across functional roles. Digital literacy, which has been mentioned several times today, is really the foundation of many jobs of the future and is an area of widespread need. Pew Research has indicated that over 50% of US adults are hesitant when using digital tools to access information. Other examples of professional skills, often termed soft skills, are communication, emotional intelligence, and teamwork. These skills are rarely taught directly in schools, despite their importance in the workforce. And I see teaching professional skills as a key opportunity, particularly for entry-level roles. Learners also need technical skills or functional skills that relate to specific job roles. At ASU, one program that we are excited about is the Aznex Program, which is funded by the US Department of Labor, in which we're collaborating with employers to train workers for high-paying, high demand jobs in areas like information technology, cybersecurity, and advanced manufacturing. Federal support for this type of workforce training is incredibly valuable. Second, we need to use real world learning and what educators call evidence-based pedagogy for skills development. Programs focused on skill building should integrate active learning, such as hands-on projects, exercises that simulate real work challenges, and peer-to-peer feedback to drive skill development. I hear all the time from companies that want employees who've had exposure to real work examples that learners would encounter in a job. And many programs are now designed to allow learners to create a portfolio that they can share with employers in an interview process. Third, learners need financial access to programs with a clear return on investment. The 44 million Americans I referenced at the beginning do not typically have disposable income to invest in their education. Although most non-degree skills-focused programs are not eligible for federal financial aid, companies like Climb Credit have created innovative tools to make it easier for learners to access low-cost loans and payment plans for programs that have demonstrated positive outcomes. That said, because financial access is such a critical barrier, I think there's an opportunity for the federal government to offer grants and low-cost loans for learners who want to invest in job-relevant education, similar to the critical Pell Grant program for degrees. And finally, most learners will need support outside of their class experience to facilitate pathways to a job. The support needed will really vary depending on the learner's personal situation, but a great example is an accountability coach to make sure that learners stay on track, and career mentors to help learners navigate to a good job. The ease of engaging online with coaches and other support opportunities has made this support far more accessible. So to sum it up, I think there's a lot to be excited about in leveraging technology to increase access to workforce relevant education. There's an enormous and growing need to upskill and reskill learners at scale. And I'm excited about the role that universities like ASU can play in meeting this need. It won't happen overnight, but with investment in quality job relevant education programs, individuals like Sharon will have a path to a much more resilient livelihood.
Thanks, Meredith, for both a nice story, a thread that pulls together many of the key themes, and a focus, obviously, on opportunities for jobs of the future. And with that, Angela, I'm going to invite you to introduce yourself very briefly. So thrilled that you've been able to join us this morning, offering not only an Arizona perspective, but also a bit of a national perspective as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lev, for the warm welcome. And I also want to thank not only Meredith for the synergistic and complementary talk. I'm going to definitely extend on some of the connections that she made, but I also want to thank the focus on student voice here that's been really compelling, and you'll hear those threads in a little bit of the stories that I want to share with you today. So I'm Angela Gunder. I'm the Chief Academic Officer for the Online Learning Consortium, and we're a global nonprofit that really focuses on helping institutions increase access to quality education through online, blended, and digital learning. And on behalf of the OLC, I'd like to express my thanks to all of the individuals who helped to bring together this Future of Tech Commission Town Hall today, and really for including us in this impactful event to create a blueprint for the nation's digital future. So before I enter into any conversations about digital equity, I always want to recognize what each of us uniquely bring to a space, particularly our lived-in experiences. So to begin, I'm also, like Meredith, going to begin with sharing a story. And this is a personal story that has really helped to frame my work most recently in centering digital learning equity as an ethical imperative of all of ours. So I had a work trip in China in 2019, and I was really lucky to spend a few days in Tokyo with family and friends afterwards. And on my last day there, I set off to visit the world's first digital art museum by a group called Team Labs. And I was riding on the subway with my husband. He grew ill and he had to leave suddenly, but he implored me to go. And I went reluctantly. When I got to the museum, I had to pack all of my belongings into a locker, including my shoes, my wallet, and my passport. And I entered into the exhibit completely on my own. And the museum consisted of all of these different digital experiences that were connected by dark hallways and barely illuminated paths. And I was one of very few non-Japanese speakers, and moving through the space made me feel really ashamed that I hadn't taken the time to learn not only the language, but how to connect with the people around me and to navigate the space better. One of the early rooms in the exhibit was called Soft Black Hole, which you can see here on the screen, and it required you to traverse a space where the floor was ostensibly a 4-foot deep foam mattress. And every step that you took displaced all of the people around you. And if you had no one to lean on like I did, you found yourself struggling and even falling down while those around you moved forward. And in that moment, I questioned whether I should have come to the museum in the first place and even how I'd get out of the space at all. Even months later, and still to this day, I couldn't shake that experience. And certainly at the onset of the pandemic, this memory took on new meaning. Watching the entire world collectively enter into digital learning environments as foreign spaces with very little light to guide the way haunted me. And I knew that so many of our students and our educators alike were being thrust into these new teaching and learning spaces without the time, the resources, and the support to really feel like they had the autonomy and the agency to make it through, or to even get out as they barely move forward. So I've not been alone in my quest for answers to how we might align our collective efforts to drive digital equity and to navigate and traverse these spaces. And as you'll see on the screen, OLC is one of 12 partner organizations in a group called Every Learner Everywhere. We're a collaborative network that's funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and we support institutions of all levels in sustaining equitable student outcomes through digital learning. And I'd like to share a little bit about our work today to illuminate a path forward in terms of digital learning policy specifically. So in our work as a network, both prior to and during the pandemic, we've seen systematic failures to address underfunding and lack of infrastructure to support institutions, particularly those that are serving Black, Latinx, Indigenous, poverty-affected, and first-generation students, and also in rural areas and in two-year colleges. And we've seen these failures at both the macro and the micro levels, from individual students attempting to persevere through classes using Wi-Fi in the parking lots of universities and restaurants alike, as we've heard from many of the students today, to career and technical and vocational schools remaining closed out of a lack of support for building hands-on learning experiences in online environments. We've also seen our educators struggle to translate what they do in the face-to-face classroom into remote instruction, rather than building out intentional, high-quality digital learning experiences. And though these quick pivots were often seen as the only option for many of our educators in terms of continuity of instruction, this emphasis on synchronous online instruction and e-meeting platforms, like we're in now, have ostensibly widened gaps for countless students that are balancing significant life changes, including fundamental access to technology to even enter the digital classroom. So cutting through the darkness, there are a ton of key practices. It's a challenge for me to get this into 10 minutes, but I wanted to focus on the ones that build on a view of digital fluency that empowers students equitably. And before I share some of these practices and how they can be supported by policy, I wanted to spotlight that causal relationship between increasing digital fluency to achieve digital equity. And digital equity really starts by honoring the many literacies that both students and educators uniquely bring to the classroom. So when I begin that conversation about digital equity, I often ask the stakeholders that I'm talking to, primarily educators, to reimagine their teaching and learning context through these essential elements of digital literacies that I have listed here as a framework for reimagining how they create digital learning experiences that center their students as the active drivers of their learning, as opposed to merely passengers on that journey. Moving to the research, and some of the research from Every Learner Everywhere, and particularly one of our network partners, Titan Partners, published a report that included perspectives from 4,000 administrators and faculty representing over 1,600 post-secondary institutions in the state of digital learning. And they did this particularly as experienced during the pandemic. And this report called the Time for Class 2021 report cited evidence-based teaching practices as critical across online, blended, and face-to-face courses uniquely as a means of increasing student learning outcomes. And within the survey, they had 80% of faculty citing the value of evidence-based teaching practices as giving students a clear path to success through courses, particularly in introductory and gateway courses. Additionally, within that report, 45% of the educators surveyed cited increasing equity and access as their instructional priority for their teaching moving forward. This is huge. And with this awareness and prioritization of digital equity amongst educators more broadly, digital learning policy really can provide a path to success by providing a clear position for the educational landscape in terms of definitions, looking at exemplars and use cases in terms of quality teaching that show the unique affordances of digital learning, as opposed to what I had talked about prior, which were weak approximations or translations of face-to-face instruction into digital learning environments. Additionally, continued support for professional learning on digital learning environments and digital equity through open educational practices has the propensity to give both faculty and students the tools that they need to move beyond OER resource or OER usage into open remix, into open research, and more importantly, open pedagogy, all without that barrier of cost. And then lastly, I just wanted to highlight within research that the exclusion of data disaggregated by race and ethnicity ostensibly removes our ability to determine whether challenges and opportunities within digital learning are affecting specific student populations in disproportionate ways. And increasing funding for research that seeks to spotlight and address endemic inequities across diverse student groups will help to ensure that our efforts are helping all of our learners and not just a subset. I've shared a lot in terms of a rabbit hole that you all can fall down. And this is really just a glimpse into the work of countless educators, not only perspectives in the current moment, but their aspirations for digital equity across teaching, learning environments. And I want to give you a couple of resources in particular that highlight the voices of students and educators across the country in moving towards a more equitable future for learning. And Every Learner Everywhere has created a series of playbooks and guides that are completely actionable, they're open, and they're for educators of all levels to look at optimizing high quality digital learning instruction that centers equity and care for students. And in particular, I also want to highlight a policy playbook on pursuing regulatory compliance for digital learning that was created in response to COVID-19. All of these resources are openly available, as I mentioned, and you can get them on the Every Learner Everywhere website. So in conclusion, I would be remiss in not finishing my story that I started at the beginning of this talk. And I was incredibly discouraged and lonely initially, as you would imagine, but I did finally make it through that room that limited my mobility and made me really question myself. And through the generosity of strangers and nonverbal communication, I realized that I was not alone, that I could absolutely call on the help of others that were around me, and that I was a lot stronger than I had felt in that moment. And through room after room, these feelings grew stronger and stronger and took me to what you see in front of you, which is a seemingly blocked room of giant plastic orbs. And at first I tried to simply push my way through, but I met a lot of resistance by others that were doing the same that rendered all of us stuck. But it was then that I discovered that if I quickly connected with those around me and helped them to clear their path, my own path would clear before me. And I actually made it all the way to the exit this way. But I really relished the time that I spent and that work making new connections and new paths that I actually stayed in the exhibit longer just to explore and keep on helping others out. And it's where I found myself. I know it's where many of you have found yourselves during this time of the pandemic. And I'd rather just stay and commit to creating that space for the agency and the autonomy of all of those around me rather than just leave those opportunities behind. So with that, I thank each of you for listening to me share a bit about my own journey and know that I honor each of you in your unique paths that you continue to make by walking. I do have a link to, I'll put it in the chat too, to these slides in case you want to revisit them as well, as I gave you quite a bit in a very short amount of time. Thank you.
Angela, there were some requests to learn more about this exhibit. So if you have a link to that, I think you've piqued everyone's curiosity about that exhibit.
When it's safe to travel, you should all go and have that moment of cognitive dissonance for sure.
I have a question that came in that I think, Meredith, I might hand to you. How are we going to ensure that the skills learned support the job applicants in both currently and in their long-term plans? Now, just thinking about what's pertinent today, especially in the realm of technology, is not necessarily of value in the future. So how would you answer that? I mean, how do we handle this knowing how fast things change?
It is a fantastic question. And I would say that, the future is going to be that people will need to be upskilling throughout their careers, just given that, studies show that the half-life of a skill now is less than 5 years. So I would say that in general, the professional skills, the foundational professional skills that I referenced, I think that those are, really lasting. So if you're going to learn the habits of teamwork, that is a really foundational thing that won't change in the same way that the technical skills will change over time. But I think by empowering people to really learn effectively how to learn and to develop the habit that they will need to continue to invest in their skill development throughout their careers, I think that that's really the shift that needs to happen.
We have so many questions. It will be impossible to get to all of them because we've only got 9 minutes left together today. But another question that I might highlight, and Angela, ask you to take on this one. How important is hiring teachers of color needed to reimagining the true transformations in education that we're talking about?
Well, it's an imperative, as a lot of folks have mentioned prior. When we talk about representation and that mattering, when we hear from the voices of our students saying, "I've never had a professor that looked like me before," or perhaps had a journey in the same way that I had. We need to approach this from the standpoint of looking at all of the dimensions of diversity that we want represented within our classroom, such that learners are leaving feeling like they have a sense of belongingness within that process, and really to emphasize what Meredith was talking about before, that the time at universities is not a one and done checklist type of process for learning, that it's a commitment to ongoing growth. And that starts with building a community that is supporting you and is centering inclusion.
It was incredible to hear Lorena say how earlier in the student panel, how specifically important and impactful that was for her.
Yes.
Let's take a quick look and see. There are so many questions here.
Just to very briefly build on that, I would say it's critical, obviously, in the classroom setting, but I would say it's actually representation is critical at every level of program design and delivery. So that's certainly something that we think about in designing programs that will, really align with the needs of diverse learners.
I'll plus one that, just thinking about it in terms of, how you had mentioned success coaches and accountability coaches, and looking at the entire life cycle for a student and the entire experience. How are we attending to belongingness? How are we attending to their empowerment and their agency throughout that entire cycle? And it does start with representation, for sure. You'll hear a lot of plus ones from us. Yeah.
Well, while we're on that, we've just got like 2 minutes left. If you were able to hear the panelists before, Senator Kelly, are there any particular things that would come back to mind that you'd want to reinforce or emphasize if you were given 2 minutes to do so?
Yeah, I think that the work with starting with what are the fundamental basic needs, when we talk about the basic securities and the basic needs of students within the classroom, there's a lot of great work done by Dr. Sarah Goldrick-Raab right now about us actually unpacking and dismantling, the many insecurities that happen within the classroom. And, we made a lot of assumptions before the pandemic about what access really truly looked like. I was at the University of Arizona prior, and when I would speak about the work that we would do within online learning, I would constantly put up the map of our indigenous lands and our tribal councils and compare that to our broadband map within the state of Arizona. And I think that the invocation in the beginning of this by Senator Kelly and by the work that this group is doing, both within this town hall and beyond, really needs to center around dismantling these misconceptions and assumptions that we have about access and starting to look at how we might create a better impact for that digitally equitable future.
Well, thanks again to good friends, to Meredith and Angela, for helping us with this particular key framing and connecting dots, which are terrific and lovely threads. Donna, thanks to your great facilitation for pulling threads. I'm going to invite Jim Steyer to join me in the spotlight here as we look to close out and look to be as practical as we possibly can be about what are the next steps. What will the commission be doing? What can we do? Our audience that joined us today, we had over 700 registrants.
Amazing.
We won't know until the end how many people actually managed to join us. And of course, all of this will be shared. All video recordings will be shared with all of the participants. But Jim, what else will be happening with the commission as you look to finish out your work?
So here's what I would tell you. First of all, thank you so much. This was outstanding. It exceeded our expectations, and we had really high expectations. So to Lev and everybody, Donna, everybody from ASU, thank you so much for putting this together. It could not have been better. And, loved hearing from the students. There's all the questions. There's a ton of great content on the Jamboard. Just the enthusiastic participation was great. And by the way, the committee, here is the basic plan. So this is the last of our town halls for now. We've done a dozen, right? This one was fantastic. They've all been different. I thought the focus today on digital equity and also how we use these tools for education, workforce development, literacy, et cetera, was great. And basically how you unleash the power of tech for good. So we are actually, the co-chairs of the commission, Governor Patrick, Secretary Spunks, myself, are actually going to convene over this coming weekend and early next week to outline the beginning of the blueprint that we're going to give to the White House, to President Biden. So we're going to directly put together and we're going to synthesize all of your input, which has been quite extraordinary. I mean, just today, but imagine we've done a dozen town halls. We've done 2 in Europe, by the way. We've interviewed the CEOs of almost all the major tech and media companies in the United States. And we've had experts on every topic from digital equity to privacy to platform accountability. So it's been and you guys have met some of the staff. I know the ASU folks have met some of the staff. We're going to put that together and we're going to deliver a blueprint to the White House late this summer to President Biden. And then we are going to turn that into some very specific long-term policy recommendations, short and long-term policy recommendations, including a number of the topics that you guys raised today. This couldn't have been a more on-point, better discussion about some of the most important stuff for young people, for education, for workforce development, et cetera. And so we're going to deliver that to the White House and to Congress and to the chairs of the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, and the Federal Trade Commission, which are really the 2 major regulatory bodies involved. And then we're going to do a roadshow. And I think, Lev, that we'll be coming back to Arizona. My day job, I'm the founder and CEO of Common Sense Media, a very large nonprofit. And we have a terrific office in Phoenix headed by outstanding Elena Lowry. We will probably come back and do a follow-up town hall with people with the same kind where we're going to present the recommendations. Some of them are going to be implemented very quickly. I mean, some of the broadband stuff that you guys reference today is going to happen in the stimulus bill. It's very likely. I think that by the time we come back and do a live event in Arizona, some of this will have already taken place because there's bipartisan support politically. You heard Mark Kelly talk about that. And your other Senator Kirsten Sinema has also been quite on record supporting a bunch of the different stuff. So the work's going to continue, but basically we're going to synthesize all the recommendations you guys came with today and that we've done in our various other town halls and individual one-on-one interviews, et cetera. We're going to turn it into a simple, easy to understand, non-overly technological or bureaucratic blueprint and other forms. And then we're going to take it on the road. And we're going to start to implement it politically at the federal and state level. So I think you'll see stuff here in Arizona in addition to at the federal level. And then I think you're going to see us really continuing to reach out to all of you, particularly the young people. I cannot thank all of the students and educators in the audience today for your commitment. I mean, in my day job as the CEO of Common Sense, we spend our lives working both with parents, tens of millions of parents, and millions of educators and students. So the input is just invaluable. And look, we live in this 24/7 digital world. You guys happen to live in a state where ASU is really one of the leading universities in the world on a digital basis, and many other ones. And so we couldn't be more grateful for the contribution, the participation, the audience participation, the panelists, and we're going to turn this into action, period. This is our future. I love hearing from all the young people and all the educators. And so couldn't have been better. Remember, we have a website called the future of techcommission.org for people who want to learn more about it. We also have a Google form in the chat that you can use to submit additional written comments. And you can follow us on Twitter. But most of all, and by the way, Lev and the folks at ASU are part of this. They've been dragged into it now and they can't get out. So they will be part of this as we go forward. And as I said, look, now it's turn this stuff into action because this is the future. And we're going to come out with a report with very short-term, but also decades-long recommendations about where this country needs to go in a coordinated fashion around tech policy. So thank you so much. Bless you all for participating, for being such a great group, such a good audience, but also such a great group of participants. And couldn't have been better. Thank you so much and onward.
Thank you, Jim. And on behalf of Donna, myself, thanks to all of you for participating in today's Future of Tech Commission Town Hall, a discussion on the future of digital equity, access, and technology innovation for the workforce.